Hey, guess what? Let's make a glass marble. What kind should we make today? I know. We haven't made in 3 weeks a flower, so that's my favorite. Let's make a flower. All right, I've got my glasses to shield me from sodium flare and harmful infrared and ultraviolet wavelengths coming off the glass when it's hot. And you guys have the same thing on the filter of this camera. So let me just see that we've got this flame set correct. You can see that. I'm going to get a magnifying glass in there in case I want to show some close-up stuff. What I'm going to show first is, here's my large glass rod that I'm going to build a flower on. And there's a round end on that, so I'll have to clean that up. And then, if I have time, there's a secondary leaf I'd like to add onto the flower, but that takes a lot of time, and I'll see where I am once the flower is done, just because I hate to drag out the demonstration too long without time compressing it. I've got a bunch of little things ready from previous work that I'm going to use. So here I have 2 greens, an orange, yellow, and a 2-color brown. The brown I'm going to use as the stamen. The greens I'll use as the petioles. The yellow, orange I'm going to use to draw on the back of the flower once it's almost done, unless I end up doing that secondary leaf design. And then the flower itself are going to be little daisy buds in yellow and white. I'm going to do a multiple flower today. So several tiny flowers in a bunch. I've been out doing a lot of hiking and seeing a lot of these very interesting compound flowers on what you would normally see as a weed. But a lot of them are very interesting, and close up they're beautiful. And it's worth a closer look. If you ever look at something and you say, oh, that's a yellow weed, but actually a little compound flower on there is quite amazing. It's like 40 little flowers, and you're only focusing on like the sort of bunch. Just maybe like an aggregate flower, like an aggregate fruit, like a raspberry or a strawberry. It starts off as a bunch of different flowers. I don't know. Actually, you know what? I'd better not say that, because I'm not 100% sure. I gotta get some more tools. All right, so I'm flashing this giant clear rod in my flame to try to get over its first strain point, which means a place where it gets grouchy, and it'll want to crack and fly apart. So, like that. So let's flash it a little bit more. And I'll put it in the flame and see if we can start getting a gather. What I'm going to do is get a big gather on this rod after I've cleaned up the end, flatten it into a disc, and squish that disc even flatter and larger so I can draw my multiple flowers on there. Drawing a multiple flower is kind of like drawing a regular flower. You sort of start in the center and work out. And instead of doing stamen, I'm going to do 3 little flower buds. And then sometimes I like to group those flower buds together with some leaves. This time I'm probably just going to leave the buds there and then go right to the secondary leaf at the end. So we'll do what's called an inside-out technique on the buds and bring them up into the marble towards the top. And then down below, I'll draw those flowers into a single stem and then add some leaves around. Just tiny leaves floating in the clear glass. So I got that rod nice and hot, and I was able to pull all that weirdness off. Let's get it there. And it's nice and clear and smooth. Now we can start our gather. The secondary leaf decoration that I'm going to do is kind of a stacked dot technique where I'm doing a dot, I'm breaking it, then I'm adding clear over top. This is a soft glass technique. Generally, you're going to see a parting or joining line if you try to do this in boro, is my understanding. So for most people, this would not be a technique that would look good on your marble. If you're doing regular soft glass blowing, crystal glass work, then this would be cool. The inside out technique will be the same for everything, except for my lead crystal glass is going to be quite a bit faster and work at a lower temperature than harder glass. Well, this past week has flown by. I always think, oh, I'm going to spend so much time on the torch and make so many things, and one of the reasons that I do demos every week is that it gets me back to the torch every week. And, you know, ideally I would be on my torch 5 days a week, but usually it's less than that because there's so much other stuff that goes in to making glass and selling glass. And it's the selling that takes a lot of the time. Alright, I'm getting a good gather in there. You know, if it's just up to me, I would just make marbles all day long. And melt stuff in my kiln, like flat work. That would be fun. I've got a kiln run that I started putting together like 3.5 weeks ago. It's still sitting there, waiting to be fired, waiting to be assembled the rest of the way. You know, stacked all the layers and stuff. If I'm doing a glass painting with enamel powders and stuff like that, I always fire those immediately. But this one, it was just stacked layers, dichroic stuff. And I got distracted and I just never got back to it. So sad. There's so much time in the day. There's so many things you get to make in your life. Look at that. That is a nice disc. Let's draw some stuff on there. So now, I want these flower buds to be tight, so I'm going to just bunch them way up on each other. And the first thing I'm going to do is do some little stamen, but I'm almost going to cover those up with the petals to make it look like the bud is still tight. It hasn't really opened yet. So there, a little stamen. I'm just doing little dots. I'm not doing a bunch of stamen. These are still undifferentiated. Now I want to make sure that those are the highest point, so I'm going to just give them a little bit of a poke. Then I'll get them started moving up. And then the petals are going to be yellow, and then I'm going to do a little bit of contrast on the outside of the petals with some white. So let's turn this flame down, and I'm going to draw some dots in there tight up to the stamen. Tiny, tiny ones. Interior petals. And then we'll have a look at that. Okay. Let's get that magnified There you see the stamen. I pushed in a little bit and melted in, and there's the first layer of petals, just little dots right next to them. I'm going to merge them into the surface of the disc just a little bit. And I'm going to do one little tiny row of petals running around that. Still tight in there, if I can. This strand's almost too big. Now, I think the second layer of petals around there. Could I have one? I have one to stick together. No, that'll be alright. I'm going to just touch on the outside one, get a little bit of white on those. Show that our flower has an attitude about not just having one color. I think that would be cool. Alright, let's melt those in, and then we'll have a look. Let's see what it looks like. I think I'm going to be okay to start turning that. So, doesn't look like much now. Get in there with a little green. Add a little green to show where the outlines, showing where the buds are. Can be squished together in 3. Now I'm going to start melting it, but I'm going to tilt it up so it starts to cup. So the disc will start to become cup shaped, and then as it becomes cup shaped, the glass from the outside of the disc is going to go around like this, and then I'm going to flatten it. And it's going to push that glass in. And each time I do that, we're going to start a convective torus of glass, donut shape. The flower going from the disc to moving out into towards the shaft of the rod. Neato. Alright, the glass is melting in and it's starting to cup a little bit, see that? Push it. When I say push, I'm not really pushing it, I'm just letting it go flat via gravity. I don't want to be mashing it down on things. This is a slower process. I'll do it one more time, and I'll show you that the whole design is shrunk in the middle of the disc. If I wanted to add more detail here, I could. And this is where you often see me add more petals or petioles. So it shrank a little. Now it's really shrink down into the center of that disc. Let's do it another few times. And we'll be able to see the buds blooming in to the disc itself. The disc is now thickening because it's starting, because it's so hot, it's starting to pull back into a sphere shape. Flattening it a little bit as I cup and push it. You can see flower coming up into the disc. There it is. Got away from me a little bit. I'm straightening it out now. Now I'm back to cupping and pushing. Give it another couple times. And it is turning that two-dimensional design into a three-dimensional blooming flower. Now we're going to do another series of cups and pushes to turn it inside out a little more, and then I'm going to pull those petioles into a point, forming a stem. Then I'm going to rake some leaves into it. Rake some leaves. That's fun. All right. I want to pull the middle of that out a little bit. Push this way. Let's see if the flower is moved down into the disc really nicely. What I want to do is just get a jungle rod. And stick it into the center, which is a little bit messy. And I'm going to pull it out. Just draw some of that messy looking stuff out. Point. There we go. Clean up this rod that I was using to pull it out. And then I'm going to pull off this little piece of crap glass. And I'm going to let surface tension pull this together a little bit. I'm going to add some tiny leaves. Go light green inside, dark green outside. You can do just one color for leaves. God, there's so many things you can do. I won't even start to list them all. Let's just go with green. That'll be fun. I'm going to let this pull into a spherical shape a little bit more. If this marble was a little bit bigger, I'd probably detach this large clear rod and get a metal handle on here. Here's our little tiny flowers moving up. Now, get it a little rounder, a little smoother, not necessarily rounder, melon shaped. It's okay, like that. You can see our flower. Now, heat up the screen. make some dots of this thing we just made. On there. Let's do 4. We'll make this kind of a Spartan looking marble. And I'm going to do a little different green on it. Let's melt those dots in first. And then let that whole thing firm up while I'm getting this one ready. Then I'm going to put some dots over top like that. And we'll melt those into each other. Now let's heat one up. Heat up another. Rake it. Rake the leaves. That was it. That secondary leaf decoration I was talking about. Now we're just going to cover those in clear using a swipe gather. We want the gather to just cover the leaves without adding a lot of mass to the marble. This is a great way to add mass too if you want to. I don't particularly want to in this application, so but you could if you wanted to. There's the marble. So far, 2, 3 little buds. Some exterior petals. Get those covered. I'm just keeping this warm, but not. I don't want it to be hot enough to move. And we'll use a swipe gather to cover each of those petals. One petal. There's the second petal. And then it. Let's now melt those in. Let them pull in a little bit, and then we'll shape them to in the marble mold or combo. You know, not all squishing it in the marble mold, and not all just heating it till it draws in. Some of both. Hello. Because if you squish it all, then you're going to really deform your design. If you heat it all, you're going to lose crispness of your design. Crispness. Crispy, crunchy marble. So, did you run up to Brigham?
I ran up to the top of the mountain.
Oh, boy. I love running up the mountain. It's
I know.
Such a great
And it
feeling.
has picnic tables at the top that I can do exercises on, whereas Brigham doesn't really.
You know, I've never, when I go out to Brigham, it's usually like I hit 1.5 miles and I'm like, oh, it's time to turn around. I never get all the way out there, but I suppose I go farther now.
If you went all the way to the park where there were picnic tables, you'd be committed to doing like 4.5 miles total.
Which is fine. I just don't usually like to take quite that much time out of my day.
Yep.
An hour and 10 minutes. It's about. I start getting bored.
Yeah, I don't want to.
I'm like, boy, I really want to accomplish something else today. All right, so I've cased those petals. And you could add more layers of ones like that. That's a really fun way of doing stuff. All right, so I'm going to switch off to a metal punty on this end. I'm going to go to a little one. I'm going to go to a bigger one, just because I got to detach this rod. So that's kind of a cool departure from our normal flower. There's actually some flowers that I will do all with those layered petals. That was a technique I was really into before I started doing the more inside-out techniques, where you turn the disc inside out. It's basically building it from right to left with those layers. And then you get your petal shapes from different rake patterns by pulling the color out, or pulling the clear next to the color, or pulling all the way through the color. There's a lot of different ways you can do that. Kind of a personal experimentation thing, you know. How deep do you heat the glass? How deep do you dig your pick in? How far do you drag? And so it depends on how you're, you know, where you are in your technique. Anyway, if you're like a very dainty manipulator, then your petals will look different than if you're someone who likes to really dig in there and have a definitive action in the glass when you do a manipulation. The hand-fisted way, the delicate way. Both are good. Sometimes you don't want to mess around. You want to just get in there, like when you're digging for a bubble. You know, you get it hot, bang, you go in and you pull, you get that right out. The more you dink around, the more you're going to mess up your design. If you want to just make something a little longer, then that's when you want to finesse it. You make something a little pushed, finesse it. You want to add a little clear in somewhere, like you're injecting that clear rod into it to fill out an area. Daintiness. Alright, so there's our secondary petal. It's really sort of hugging around the flower rather than coming up next to it. That makes a big difference to me. I can really detect that and alright, so there's our tiny little buds. Compound flower. And then, oh yeah, from the end you can see those leaves coming up and hugging the flower. That is fun. Alright, let's run it through. Oops, it's a little crooked. We're going to finish this unattached end with a cherry wood mold. Oh, that marble went pretty fast. I stayed on the smaller side. When you keep things smaller, they go quicker. You know, for every 1/16 of an inch you add, you're adding a lot more time to your marble. That's not a rule of thumb. When you go bigger, it takes longer. That's all. And so since I haven't done one of these in a while with the secondary petal, I was a little wary of having the mass start to get away. If you start to add more layers of those secondary petals or leaves, you can really bulk up fast. And then I either have to take longer time-wise, or I have to crank up my flame a lot, which would mean that I would have to change my camera and a lot of stuff, because the flame would be huge. Which you can do on this torch. This mid-range, you can really change gears. So let's look at that. And it's pretty nice. I might be able to improve it a little bit, but I think I'm going to leave it as is. A little twist, a little tiny twist. It's cute. going in for perfection or changing a little thing is often, you know, you get a different little thing than the one you had, and not what you intended. So I'm going to be happy with the way that is. You can see it's got just a little twirl on the end. Looks cool, I think. It's very minimal flower, but it's got several colors. It's very dainty. We put in a lot of little tiny things, and you'll be able to appreciate that when you see it in the pictures. And from the different angles, it's really going to look different. You know, it looks like a regular flower from one side. From the back side, it looks like mostly leaf, and from the front side, it looks like, well, you can't see it now, but you get a big those leaves become the backdrop that the flower is setting on, which is always kind of cool. Since a sphere is a lens whose focal length is at its far surface rather than outside of the surface, you get a real nice magnification of what is just on the front, just on the inner side of the marble looking through it, if that makes sense. I confuse myself. Alright, so I'm going to put that in the cherry mold. Give a little time to cool off and settle down before I touch it in there. And it's going to, the cherry wood molds, you know, they'll change the shape a little bit. And then they cool the outside surface. So that I can now touch it with the pliers. I'm going to, first though, I'm going to chill that last attachment point and tap it off. And tap it off in a fiber blanket over here. It's actually a compressed fiber blanket tile or fiber board. And so you chill that area and then you tap it off. I'm going to tap any soot off of my torch. Polish that last little mark. And I heat it strongly and then come off. Heat it strongly and come off. Heat it strongly one last time, maybe 2 more times. Then I'm going to pick up a bunch of different sizes of these marble tweezers. And this one I'm going to go for this smallish medium one. Heat it up until it just becomes orange. And that way it gives me an indicator that I've gone past the temperature I'm looking for, and now it's coming down to black with another couple seconds so it doesn't adhere to the marble when I pick it up. Pick it up without sticking to the glass, and there is our multi-flower with the secondary petal. I'll put it in the emulator. And there it will stay for an hour, where all the bond angles of the silicon tetroxide matrix will adjust, and the bond angles will become strong rather than strained as you hold the glass just between its solid and liquid point on the solid side, so that all that stress can come out of the glass, and then you lower the temperature gradually so as not to crack the marble. So that was a multiple flower marble with a secondary petal, and it's more on a, you know, if you go to the next level of detail, that becomes more spectacular. This is kind of a quick demo of that, and maybe I will point out some features that you can see the differences there when I take pictures of it. Probably closer to next week. I'm going to be traveling starting tomorrow, and I don't think I'll have time to get all this settled up before I head out, but I will be back regular time next week, All right, have a good one. See ya.